The story kicks off with this intense rain just pouring down, covering the deserted streets of a city. There's this young lad making his way across the barrier of a bridge. After a quick internal ponder, he just hurls himself into what seems like the end, death and all. But just when he's about to have that split-second regret, bam! A vampire pops out of nowhere and swoops in to stop the fall, telling the kid to hold back the tears, because his blood's gonna taste even worse if he cries. Next thing you know, the vampire's sinking his teeth into the poor lad's neck for a quick snack. Now in some distant, unknown world in this massive castle, there are a few voices pondering on who the next big shot lord is gonna be. One voice is all in for this big shot ruse. Then this old crone calls for quiet and spills the beans that the next vampire lord's gotta be someone with some real kick-ass powers. But get this, only a perfect vampire, one who's found his destined partner and turned her into a vampire, is worthy of the throne. So the vamps around are scratching their heads, wondering who fits the bill. And there's this one dude, seems real keen on the destined partner part. Back in the human realm, there's Yamamoto Mito. Just got the boot from this ramen joint called Man's Generation, because the boss found out he's been crashing there overnight. Mito's going on about not having a dime to his name for a proper place, so he's asking for some time to sort it out. But the boss ain't having it, saying customers have been griping because there are so many gals coming in to see him that the guys won't even set foot in the joint anymore. So he hands Mito his stuff and declares it's the end of the line. But hey, as a silver lining, the guy throws in that a looker like Mito won't have trouble snagging another gig. So there's Mito, walking the streets, feeling low cause he's lost yet another job, this time without even getting paid. He knows it's on him, but that doesn't stop the gloom. Then this group of school gals walks by, chirping about his looks. Mito turns around trying to figure out what's up, and these gals are practically losing their minds cause they got a glance from the handsome dude. But Mito's got bigger fish to fry, like a measly 12 yen in his wallet, meaning another night camped out on the sidewalk. So he's reaching out to his folks up in heaven for help, reflecting on how he's needed it ever since his folks kicked the bucket. Cop asked him once if he remembered anything from the fire that took him, but his mind was a blank. After that day, all that mattered was buried in the rubble of his home. For the longest time, he bounced around from relative to relative, feeling like a burden wherever he went. Then one day, he got the boot after a relative took care of his compulsory education. So from then on, Mito was on his own. According to her, a pretty face like his wouldn't have a rough time on the streets. So the kid's been desperate for work, but he either gets the boot from manual labor gigs because he's not as burly as the rest or runs into the brick wall of unemployment keeping him on the streets. So now, all Mito's got left is to cross that bridge and try his luck on the other side of town. Meanwhile, over at La Fray's restaurant, meaning Strawberry in French, there's this handsome and charming waiter living up to the name of the joint, serving up tasty dishes and visually stunning plates to a crowd of women swooning over both his looks and the strawberries meticulously laid out. After tending to his customers, this waiter notices the rain just starting. Outside, Mito's out there on the prowl for any chance to shake off unemployment. Once the rain starts, he sees folks popping up their umbrellas or kids his age calling for their moms to pick him up. But Mito's got only himself and his backpack, using it to try and dodge the rain while making a dash for some cover. Finally, he makes it under the awning of La Fray's, but his little backpack didn't stop his clothes from getting soaked, and all that running made his body realize it hasn't had a decent meal in ages. So Mito staggers and falls right into the restaurant, accidentally knocking over a potted plant. Embarrassed, he starts cleaning up right away, and to top it off, he cuts his finger on a clay shard. That's when a La Fray's employee comes over to tend to him. Noticing the bleeding, he takes Mito to fix up his wound in the back. Mito's thinking it's no big deal, this injury, but the waiter shows his true colors by licking the kid's wound. But man, it tastes so foul, like sewer-level bad, that Mito can't help but cry and gag in disgust. According to the waiter, Mito's blood is thick, sticky, and tastes like meat that's gone bad and sat in the sink for a week. The kid's like, "What's your deal, man? You're the one who started licking my finger." But the waiter's like, "Hey, your blood looked good. Got curious." With that said, Mito realizes this dude's doing some vampire stuff, but of course he ain't buying it. So the waiter kicks the kid with the rancid blood out of the restaurant, and Mito's out of there, tripping on the bizarre behavior of that guy. In the back of La Fray's, the waiter gets approached by another dude asking how the tasting went, seeing as it's been 10 years since he's had any human blood. The waiter's like, "How'd you get here, Komori?" And he's like, "It's my duty as a butler." So the waiter's saying the taste was awful and human blood just ain't it. But Komori thinks the bad taste is because the victim ain't loved by nobody, cause apparently, the amount of love a human receives and gives back determines the flavor of their blood, which can be as sweet as a strawberry. Obviously, female blood's better, but a loved-up man's can be just as sweet. So finally, Komori asks Ruko what he thinks about taking care of the kid, till he reaches that sweetness level, Because even though Ruka's been off human blood for 10 years, it's clear he wanted to sink his teeth into that young guy. However, Ruka responds that he prefers to stick with his strawberry juice if blood tastes that horrible anyway, and tells Komori to stop trying to give orders around there. At that moment, Komori remembers that he is the founder, and putting the waiter in his place, he informs that in his homeland, many are questioning Ruka's ability to take his place as leader. According to the founder, this is because Ruka has forgotten the purpose of being in the human world, and this is causing a commotion in the conclave. Therefore, to become a perfect vampire and take Komori's place, Ruka must fulfill the duty assigned to him. At this moment, another waiter asks Ruka for help because the restaurant is very busy, and before he leaves, Komori asks the vampire to remember why he's here. After an exhausting shift, Ruka asks his colleague to pass him some strawberry juice because the bad taste in his mouth is sinister. The colleague asks if he ate some junk, and Ruka replies that it was thick, bitter, and icy junk. Having said that, he recalls the founder's theory about the lack of love in the victim, while the other waiter asks what he's talking about. Ruka tells him to forget it and reflects that the young man must be very lonely to not have anyone's love. Speaking of him, Minnow runs like crazy to protect himself from the rain, but a motorcycle passes by quickly and splashes water on the boy. With this added annoyance, Minnow thinks about how lucky he is and gives up avoiding the rain altogether. A little further ahead, he crosses the bridge back to the other side of the city, but he knows that wherever he goes, he has nowhere to go in the end. In Mito's mind, this is a clear sign that nobody will miss him if he happens to leave this world, and in his longing for affection, he plans to throw himself in the hope that anyone, will mourn his death. However, he gives up the idea and believes that tomorrow he might find a job, but ends up slipping and falling off the bridge altogether. Then, after Ruka saves his life, the vampire asks how he is, and Mito wonders when was the last time someone asked him that. Ironically, even in the face of the circumstances, Mito feels happy and welcomed, so Ruka finally bites the boy's neck and licks the blood that was dripping. After that, Ruka throws Mito unceremoniously onto the fence and says that his blood is horrible, but it'll do. Then he wants to know if the boy wanted to take his own life on that bridge, and Mito says that nobody needs him. In that case, the vampire suggests that Mito become his source of food because that way he will be needed. Aware of the proposal, Mito gradually accepts that he is in the presence of a vampire, undead beings that suck the blood of their victims, but soon the boy faints from everything he experienced that day. During this time, a dream of a vampire that takes him to the skies and feeds on his blood invades the boy's mind, who is then awakened by a cat and a bat flying above his bed. Seeing the boy wake up, Ruka informs him that they are in the boy's dormitory of Hijiragoka School for Boys where he lives and studies. Finally, he asks the boy to take a shower so he doesn't get sick, and after that, he can go home. Mito asks about that story about being a food source, but Ruka replies that he was just kidding because he may be thirsty, but he prefers not to suck the blood of a scared kid. However, Mito understands the warmth he felt as a reason to surrender to the vampire, but as soon as he affirms that he wants to become a vampire's meal, Ruka throws him into the bathroom and tells the emotional boy to take a quick shower to get out of there. Mito says he has nowhere else to go afterwards, and Ruka replies that it makes sense for the boy's blood to be bad because nobody really loves him. Mito asks what he can do to improve his blood, and the vampire reveals that for that, the boy needs to learn to be loved by him. Upon hearing these words, Mito becomes emotional and remembers every moment when Ruka spoke about needing him, seeing in it the possibility of receiving the love he never had before. So he agrees to be loved for his blood to become less bitter and become a food source. Having said that, the vampire opens the door and introduces himself as Sotone Ruka, promising to love Mito every day, but the boy feels embarrassed and locks him out to take a shower. Ruka says that from now on, the two will live together there, and Mito makes it clear that he's not doing it just to have somewhere to stay. Then the boy questions if he's doing the right thing while he changes clothes and outside. Ruka reveals that Mito saved his life because he never managed to suck the blood of women, so he always looked for a handsome boy for himself. However, while listening to those words, Mito reveals his true identity and wonders what will become of her now. Myth dreams about a woman saying that when a girl is loved, her blood tastes like strawberry, which makes vampires crave it more and more. When Myth wakes up, she comes face to face with the same cat from the night before named Marion and is startled to realize she was sleeping smuggled up with Ruka. The girl asks the vampire why he's sleeping with her, and Ruka explains that it's to make her blood sweeter. This makes Myth remember that the vampire let her live with him in exchange for being his food. However, Ruka made this choice thinking Myth is a boy, which makes her wonder what will happen if he finds out the truth. Suddenly, Ruka pulls the girl closer to have her breakfast. She says she didn't know he would suck her blood so early, and the vampire explains that being her food means letting him feed whenever he wants, even if it tastes horrible. Myth realizes that this way she'll end up with holes all over her neck. So Ruka uses his vampire powers and makes the wound disappear with a wave of his hand. Then the girl sees a bat in the room and remembers seeing it the day before. Suddenly, the animal reveals itself to be Komori, Ruka's butler, who, after being introduced to Myth, shows a uniform he brought for her to attend Injurigoka Boys' School. And so Myth goes to study at the school, which makes her very nervous, fearing someone will discover her secret. Ruka notices something bothering Myth and thinks it's because of the class. So he reassures her, explaining that all the classmates are nice and he'll also be there for whatever she needs. Then the two enter the classroom and Myth introduces herself to all the students in the class, being careful to make a good impression. The guys are impressed with the new classmate and one of them recognizes Myth, having seen her in the cafeteria where he and Ruka work, and introduces himself as Kagurazaka Takara. Myth is relieved to see that everyone is really nice, just as the vampire said, and she chats with the guys when another guy arrives in the classroom and stares at her from afar. Later, Myth gets tired of attending classes when Ruka invites her to work part-time at the cafeteria because the vampire knows she needs money and his butler, Komori, is the owner of the place. At the cafeteria, Komori accepts the new employee calmly, and Ruka shows Myth the locker room to put on the work uniform. Then the vampire starts changing, which leaves the girl not knowing what to do. He tells Myth to put on the uniform too, and she tries to stall him, saying she'll change later. But Ruka doesn't understand why and starts taking off Myth's blouse. The girl quickly pushes the vampire out of the locker room, and he agrees to go ahead so she can change alone. Myth is relieved but thinks that Ruka almost found out she's a girl and decides to be more careful not to be discovered. After changing, Myth meets Takara and another schoolmate, Juri, whom she finds as cute as a porcelain doll. Then Myth notices the cafeteria customers who were enchanted by the vampire's beauty. This makes her realize that, with Ruka being so popular and surrounded by beautiful girls, he could definitely get blood with a better taste than hers. After that, Ruka asks Myth to go get some fruits in the pantry, and she goes there while thinking that if he can have any girl's blood, he doesn't need her. Suddenly, Myth sees Juri watching her at the pantry door. The guy says she's different from the other students and may have fooled Ruka and Takara, but he knows she's hiding something. The girl doesn't know what to say and Juri approaches her, causing her to hit the pantry shelf and knock some things down. Quickly, the vampire runs to Myth and protects her, but in doing so, he ends up getting hurt. Everyone is worried about him and Juri feels guilty for hurting his friend, but Myth says it's not his fault since she bumped into the shelf. Then the girl takes Ruka to the dormitory so he can rest, where the vampire warns that such a small wound can heal completely as soon as he feeds. Upon learning this, Myth quickly lies down on the bed and Ruka drinks her blood so fast that he ends up choking. She feels bad, thinking it's because of her bad taste, and regrets not having as good blood as a girl's. The vampire consoles Myth and says she's already enough after all, his wound is healed, and he only choked because he drank too fast. Then Ruka puts a vampire tool on the girl's neck, which he explains is called sang sucre, and serves to evaluate the taste of human blood, where the blue color means the taste is bad. Myth feels bad because this is the current color of her tool, but the vampire says he will make it turn red like strawberry. Furthermore, Ruka remembers that it's his fault for not being able to feed on girls' blood. Myth is worried and asks why this is. Then Komori, who was in the room listening to their conversation, opens a secret shelf, revealing that the reason the vampire can't feed on women's blood is because he's an otaku who only likes 2D girls. Myth is shocked by the discovery, and Ruka admits that he's a fan of an anime about two magical girls fighting to save the world. Seeing Myth's reaction, he questions what's wrong with being an otaku, since he supports his hobby with his own money and treats real girls well, even though he doesn't get along with them. Komori tells Myth that to make matters worse, every time he suggested to Ruka to feed on someone, his master refused, saying he didn't want disgusting men's blood, and for that reason, he is grateful for Ruka having found her. The girl feels relieved that the vampire doesn't feed on women because of such a simple reason that she starts laughing at the situation and enjoys herself with Ruka, while wondering if she could stay there forever, even with her lie. Later, Mita goes to a restaurant to satisfy her hunger because she needed to replenish the energy that the vampire has been draining. At that moment, the girl notices Takara and Juri watching her, astonished by her appetite. Takara asks if Ruka is okay after the accident he had at the cafeteria, leaving her at a loss for words because she couldn't reveal that the vampire had already completely healed and spent the rest of the day excitedly watching his favorite anime. Stabino simply replies that Ruka is fine because the cut wasn't very deep. Takara is relieved and tells her that Juri was so worried about what happened that he barely slept at night. Then the guy walks away to get some ramen, and Juri takes the opportunity to apologize to Mito. The girl says it's okay and confesses that she really hides a secret from them, and she makes it clear that it's nothing that will hurt Ruka or anyone else. Juri notes that everyone has a secret and says he won't investigate anything else about her. He begins to say that he also has a secret when Taka returns and tells Mito that he and Juri have been friends since childhood. At that moment, the guy from their class who stared at Mito on her first day shows up on a motorcycle at the cafeteria door. The girl asks who he is, and Juri explains that his name is Nikaido Ren and he's a delinquent who constantly gets into fights and advises her to stay away from him. Mito agrees to keep her distance from the guy, but when she arrives at the boys' dormitory, she finds Ren standing right at the door of her room. He tells her that he heard she's sharing the dorm with Ruka and asks them to talk in the backyard. Outside, Ren asks Mito if she doesn't know that her roommate is a vampire, acting as if he's worried that she's in danger, even going as far as punching a wall. At that moment, Ruka appears questioning why Ren went after his roommate instead of saying what he wants to his face, and Ren leaves, saying he has nothing to say to him. After the delinquent walks away, Ruka asks how Mito is and shows concern that her encounter with Ren made her feel worse. Then the vampire starts feeding right there, which worries the girl that someone might see them and discover what he is. Ruka acts as if he has nothing to worry about, and Mito complains about his attitude and says she cares about him, which makes Ruka embarrassed. Not knowing how to respond to the girl, the Otaku vampire says a line from an anime. Mito finds it strange, and Ruka explains that he always uses it as a reference to show his love for her. However, this leaves Mito quite irritated. After all, she was genuinely worried about Ruka while he was just repeating lines from a series he likes. After Mito leaves in anger, the vampire wonders what happened since he was supposed to be teaching her about love, not the other way around. Later in Juno class, Mito watches Ren fighting and remembers when he punched the wall with just one punch and notices that he is really strong. Juri hears her comment and says that Ren has always had a somewhat destructive side, while Ruka is so fast that sometimes he doesn't even seem human. Mito notices that Juri is observant when the teacher calls her to fight Ren. The girl gets irritated that Ruka let the guy find out that he's a vampire and tells Ren that she'll protect Ruka from him. At that moment, the guy notices 2 holes on Mito's neck. Then he knocks her down to end the fight in a second and takes her out of the room. Ruka sees the 2 leaving and gets worried about the girl. Alone, Ren says he knows that the wound on Mito's neck means that she's not just a roommate of the vampire, and he says he's worried because no one except them at school knows about Ruka, and if she keeps feeding him, she'll end up becoming a vampire too, and won't be able to live as a normal human anymore. Ren says that for this reason, he can't allow that to happen because it's something that can't be undone, and advises Mito to leave and go back to her parents because vampires are already lifeless and heartless monsters. This makes the girl question the guy because for her, living humans are much more monstrous since they judge by appearance and discard people when they become inconvenient, and that's why Ruka has a much bigger heart than other people. Mito still says that if she stays with him, unlike what Ren thought, she won't lose anything because there's nothing left to lose, and that Ruka was the only one who reached out to her. And if he's a monster, she'd rather be with a monster 1,000 times than with people. Even so, Ren says he cares about Mito and will protect her from the vampire. The girl is surprised by the guy's concern, but since she wants to be with Ruka, she just reassures him that she won't turn into a vampire. Then Ren apologizes for being so rough and tells the 2 to go back to class. Mito responds that it's okay and suggests that they both skip class. And so they leave talking while Ruka watches them from afar. The vampire was listening to their conversation and thinks how Ren is very brave to get so close to his food. Then Ruka remembers Mito saying that he has a bigger heart than other people and wonders what he's feeling for her. After spending some time with Mito working at the cafeteria, the girl gets the hang of how to do the job properly, and Juri and Takara comment that they've been wanting to throw her a welcome party for a while. To celebrate, they decide to spend a weekend having a barbecue, and the idea gets Mito really excited since she's never had barbecue before. She starts begging Ruka to come along too, which makes the vampire feel awkward, but he ends up agreeing to join the outing. As Mito gets closer, Ruka's heart races, and Komori notices that something is wrong with his master and finds it strange since vampires can't get sick. Later, Juri and Takara explain that they have a cool place for them to spend the weekend, with outdoor hot springs, and since they're going glamping, a luxury camping trip, they won't need to bring tents or sleeping bags, just a change of clothes. Mito didn't have anything to wear, but Juri says she can borrow something to wear. Ren overhears the group's conversation and remembers when he was a child and his mother agreed to leave with his father, who was a vampire, even though she knew that by doing so, she would never be human again. He regrets not being able to protect his mother and decides he won't let the same thing happen to Mito. During the weekend, the 4 go camping and Mito gets all excited when she sees the luxury campsite that Takara arranged and explains to her friends that this is the first time she's traveled, making Juri wonder what kind of life she led. Later, the group starts preparing everything for the barbecue when they see Ren arriving on a motorcycle, and they wonder why he decided to camp right next to them, when there are so many other places to do it. While Ren sets up his camp, Ruka and Mito wonder what he's planning, and she remembers that Ren promised to protect her from the vampire. Then Ruka decides to grab Mito and carries her to the stream, where he tosses her into the water, showing jealousy after seeing her looking at Ren. The girl joins in the fun and pulls Ruka into the stream, getting them both soaked. So they decide to take advantage of already being wet and start having fun splashing water at each other until Juri interrupts the play to remind them that they still needed to finish preparing the barbecue. Before getting back to work, Mito thanks Ruka for agreeing to the idea of the two of them going on that trip because she's never had so much fun in her life. At that moment, a drop of water falls into the girl's eyes and she lifts her shirt to dry herself, making the vampire feel awkward. Mito notices Ruka staring at her and becomes afraid that the wet clothes will reveal her secret. Because of that, she rushes into the cabin to change, using the excuse of being afraid of catching a cold. Ren sees Mito distancing herself from the rest of the group and takes the opportunity to talk to her outside the cabin. He asks if she's made the vampire promise not to turn her, and she explains that she hasn't found the right moment yet. Then Ren reminds her that if she becomes a vampire, she'll lose everything she has, and there will be no turning back. Furthermore, he says that if she can't prove to him that there's nothing to worry about, he'll keep her away from Ruka, even by force. At night, the four enjoy the barbecue together, especially Mito, who's never had barbecue before. Meanwhile, Ren watches them from afar. Later, Mito is alone with Ruka, and the vampire takes the opportunity to satisfy his hunger, feeling so relieved to finally have fed that he doesn't even mind the bad taste of her blood. Then Mito asks if she's going to become a vampire. Ruka laughs, finding the question amusing, and makes it clear that was never his intention. He heals Mito's neck to leave no mark of his bite and explains that vampires aren't allowed to increase the number of vampires, and for that reason, they all have a destined partner to feed from. Ruka reveals that vampires say this destined partner has the best blood, and when found, the vampire can only drink from them. Because of this, Mito is serving as a substitute until he finds his partner. Knowing that her time with Ruka will eventually end and that she's nothing more than a substitute makes Mito sad. She runs away from him towards the trees when a moth lands on her forehead. The insect scares the girl, and she runs into the arms of the vampire, seeking his protection, who was coming after her. Ruka once again feels his heart conflicted with Mito's approach, and the girl realizes that his heart is beating as fast as hers. They stare at each other for a while, but then Ruka recovers from the moment and pushes her away, just in time for Juri and Takara to arrive and not see their love moment. The two were coming back from the outdoor hot springs of the place and comment that they had a great time. Right away, the girl takes the opportunity to escape the awkward situation she had with Ruka and says she's going to take a bath, and on the way, Ren sees her heading for the hot springs. Arriving there, Mito takes advantage of the empty place to take her bath without worry, where she reflects that if Ruka finds his destined partner, the two of them won't be able to be together anymore. Then Mito remembers that she went there to have fun and enjoy the trip and decides to focus only on doing that. So the girl admires the night when Ren arrives at the hot springs looking for her. Through a crack, he sees a woman bathing and remembers that the place is unisex, so it accepts both men and women. However, he recognizes the resemblance of the girl with Mito and notices her clothes that were left behind. To confirm his suspicion, Ren calls out to her and Mito responds, making him sure that the girl has been lying to everyone about being a boy. But instead of waiting outside, he decides to enter to take a bath too. Mito becomes anxious at the thought of being discovered, but manages to put on her wig just in time for Ren to open the door. Then he says he'll get in the water to not leave her alone as a way to ensure her safety, since there's no problem with them being there together. After all, they're both guys. The girl thinks for sure the guy is going to find out the truth, but he not only doesn't comment on having discovered her secret already, but also pretends to be clueless, acting as if he's just enjoying the hot springs and not noticing the obvious. So Mito notices that Ren's back is covered in scars, and he explains that when you're strong, you always attract someone wanting to cause trouble, and after facing the troublemakers, you're seen as a monster. Mito says the ones in the wrong in the story are the ones who started the fight with him, and that he's a good person and a trustworthy friend who cares and worries about others. Ren feels embarrassed to find out that Mito considers him a friend and turns his back on her, who takes advantage of the moment to leave the hot springs without being seen. Since the guy already knows the truth, he continues facing away, letting the girl leave peacefully. Suddenly, Ren hears a noise and rushes to see Mito and finds her lying on the ground, who explains that she got sick from spending too much time in the water. Then Ren carries Mito on his back to the camp and says that if she keeps that up, she'll turn into a vampire soon. The girl explains that this won't happen because Ruka doesn't intend to turn her, besides he has a predestined partner who isn't her. At that moment, the vampire appears with Juri and Takara, who were on their way to the hot springs because they were worried about Mito taking so long. Seeing the girl with Ren, Ruka gets furious and asks why the guy was carrying her, who explains that he's only doing it to help because Mito got sick from spending too much time in the water. Then Mito gets down and Ruka pulls her closer to him. Then Ren starts to leave and the girl hurries to thank him for his help, but the guy replies that there's no need to thank him after all, they're friends. Afterwards, Juri and Takara approach and Ruka explains that she got sick because her body got too hot. They think that then the fireworks won't happen, but Mito, who was eager to make the most of the outing, says it's okay to participate in the fireworks. However, the vampire intervenes and says that the only thing that will happen is him taking care of her. Then Ruka leaves carrying Mito and tells Juri and Takara to enjoy the fireworks alone. He takes her inside the cabin and the girl realizes that Ruka really cared about her. The vampire makes a cold compress with a damp cloth and applies it to Mito's arms and legs, who is moved by his protection and care for her. But despite the happiness of that moment, the girl remembers that it's temporary, since she's just a substitute. Shortly after, Juri and Takara ask Ruka to take the fireworks outside because they forgot some inside the cabin. The vampire says goodbye to Mito and asks her to rest, but the girl holds him and says that she doesn't mind their relationship being temporary because until she meets her predestined partner, he should love her. Suddenly, Mito faints and falls asleep and Ruka catches her in time to put her safely in bed. Meanwhile, outside, Juri and Takara enjoy the last remaining fireworks while waiting for Ruka to bring the rest to them, wondering about the friend's delay. Inside the cabin, the vampire is once again swayed by Mito and thinks that when he finally got close to forgetting the strange feelings he's having, she asks him to love her. Then Ruka, seeing Mito asleep, approaches, considering kissing her when he finally remembers that, as far as he knows, they're both men. And so, increasingly confused by his feelings, Ruka runs out of the cabin and meets his founder, who scolds him for falling in love with anime characters and a boy. The vampire remembers that, like all others, Ruka has a woman he's destined for, and because of that, he can't feel anything romantic for anyone else. The founder also says that if Ruka falls in love with someone else, he'll never meet his destined partner and will end up wandering the world forever as a lonely and bloodthirsty vampire. The founder says that for this reason, Ruka must look for his predestined partner and become a true vampire, capable of replacing him and becoming the new lord of the vampires, and until that happens, he can't fall in love with any man or woman. Ruka agrees with the founder and says he won't fall in love with anyone, determined to fight against the feelings he has for Mito. A few days after the camping trip, Mito goes to Juri and Takara to explain that she's worried about Ruka because since the trip, he's been going out alone early in the morning and returning late at night, and even though they share a room, they barely see each other. Takara agrees that it's indeed strange for Ruka to be going out alone, as he usually sticks with Mito. Additionally, although she doesn't tell her friends, the main reason for her concern is that Ruka hasn't been eating since the camping trip and is probably very hungry. The next day, Ruka goes to school ahead of Mito, who becomes worried because it's been almost a week since they've properly seen each other. At that moment, the girl sees the vampire in the hallway and grabs him, expressing concern that he hasn't eaten for days. She then takes Ruka to an empty room and offers her neck for him to feed on, making it clear to the vampire that he can take enough to last the whole week if he prefers. However, despite all her insistence, Ruka refuses to feed and says he's not hungry. With this attitude from him, Mito becomes certain that the vampire is avoiding her. At work, the girl wonders if the reason for this is because she asked him to love her during the camping trip when Komori appears, sensing that something is bothering her. The vampire offers a calming tea and deduces that Mito's worry has to do with her master. The girl explains that Ruka has been avoiding her in recent days and hasn't been eating, and she doesn't like the idea of him going hungry because of her. Komori comments that Mito is a kind person and, as a founder, admits that he understands why Ruka desires much more than just her blood. Suddenly, the two hear a commotion from the store's customers. Mito goes to see what it is and discovers that all the girls were enchanted by Ren, who went to the cafe to see her. The girl goes to him and he asks how she's feeling. Mito remembers that it's been a week since they went camping and she's already recovered from the effects of spending too much time in the hot springs. However, Ren notices that the girl isn't feeling well and asks Komori, the store manager, to borrow her. He agrees and is intrigued to see how Ruka will react to them leaving together, as he was watching the scene hidden. Ren takes Mito on his motorcycle to a commercial area and explains that it's the first time he's had a friend, so he doesn't really know what to do to make her feel better, but he thought doing something like shopping or having fun would help. Mito thanks Ren for trying to cheer her up but says there's nothing special she'd like to do. However, just then, she spots a women's clothing store and thinks about how it would be if she met Ruka as a girl. So Mito enters the store and asks to try on a dress. Ren is a little confused by her decision, but decides to wait outside while the girl, who everyone sees as a boy, tries on the clothes. In the fitting room, Mino takes off her men's clothes and puts on the dress, realizing she had forgotten the feeling of wearing women's clothes and how she looks wearing them. Outside, two girls decide to enter the store to shop and notice Ren, imagining he's waiting for his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Mino looks at herself in the mirror while wondering if anything would change if Ruka saw her in that dress. Suddenly, Mino hears from outside the fitting room some girls commenting that they saw a man enter there to try on a dress and decide to spy. Mino is afraid of being caught, but just as the two were about to open the fitting room curtain, Ruka appears to protect her from embarrassment. He tells the girls that there's nothing wrong with someone wanting to wear any clothes, regardless of what they are, and bets that the dress looks better on his friend than it would on them. So the girls leave and Ruka enters the fitting room, where he is surprised to see Mino wearing a dress. She explains that the reason for this is because she thought if he saw her like this, he would want to drink her blood. The vampire begins to analyze the girl in a way that embarrasses her and says that he looks cute dressed as a woman. Then Ruka begins to feel the urge to feed and starts to express his feelings for Mino. But he remembers the founder saying that vampires shouldn't fall in love with anyone other than their destined partner and contains his feelings, saying he likes Mino as a very important friend and for this reason he doesn't need to pretend to be a girl. Next, Ruka announces that he's going to feed on her blood, and Ren, who was listening to the conversation outside, enters the fitting room, saying that while they may be friends, he's against the idea of the vampire feeding on Mino. The two guys start to argue and the girl finds it amusing. She then interrupts the discussion and thanks them for becoming her friends because she's very happy to have them both. Later, Mino kicks Ruka and Ren out of the fitting room to change clothes, leaving them embarrassed by her words and the fact that she's acting like a cute girl. Later, Mino sees in the mirror in her room that her necklace has changed from blue to orange as a result of the love she's been receiving and goes to show it to Ruka, excited about the idea that her blood has improved in taste. The vampire is happy to hear the news and is excited to finally feed on something that doesn't taste like spoiled curry. Komori overhears the conversation and suggests to his master that he allow him to prepare Mino so that her blood becomes even better. The butler takes the girl for a refreshing bath and explains that after she cleans up, she should apply a special strawberry perfume that arouses a vampire's appetite and wear a robe. After finishing giving instructions to Mino, Komori leaves the bathroom for the girl to take her bath. Ruka asks what he's up to and makes it clear that no matter what happens, he won't have anything more than friendship with Mino. Komori observes that because of the love his master has for her, the girl is releasing more pheromones than before, and after wishing them both good night, he flies out the window. Shortly after, Mino steps out of the shower in a robe, just as Komori requested, which leaves the vampire a bit off balance. She remarks that she's not sure if her blood has improved in taste or not, but she knows it will happen eventually since she has his and Ren's friendship. At that moment, Ruka catches a whiff of strawberry perfume and asks Mino to forget about Ren because he loves her much more. The girl feels embarrassed, and the vampire begins to feed on her blood while she thinks he won't love her as more than a friend. Then Mino notices that Ruka was taking longer to feed than usual and asks how it tasted. The vampire, clearly distracted, stops sucking her blood and says the taste changed from spoiled curry to spoiled strawberry. Disappointed, he goes to take a bath to cheer up, and Mino also feels sad knowing that the taste of her blood didn't improve and concludes that maybe the taste will only improve when the color of her necklace turns red. In the bathroom, Ruka is surprised to realize that while he was feeding, he was in a trance until she called him, to the point of not even caring about the awful taste. This makes the vampire struggle against the feelings he's having for Mino again because although he doesn't get along with women very well, he couldn't see the sense in falling in love with a guy. However, Ruka admits that for a moment he found Mino cute, and if things continue like this, he would end up falling in love. So the vampire decides to find a girlfriend for her, pretending that this way she would receive more love to change the taste of her blood. The next day, Ruka tells his friends about his idea and Takara immediately gets excited about the plan to find someone for his friend. So he sends an invitation to some friends from a nearby girls' school and 4 of them confirm. Juri notices that Takara arranged a girl for each one of the group, including him, which leaves the boy upset. He refuses to go with the others to meet the girls and gets irritated with Takara, who asks Ruka and Mito if they know another guy to go with them instead of Juri. So on the day of the meeting with the girls, they call Ren to support Mito as well, who does so, although clearly not wanting to have gone. When the girls arrive, one of them named Makimura Maina reveals that the 4 of them are first-year students at Yurigaoka Girls' School and are also fans of the coffee where they work. Mito notices that they seem like high society ladies when Maina asks to talk to her privately. Everyone is surprised at how quickly Mito managed to attract attention, and Takara pushes her closer to Maina, who invites her for a short walk. Outside, Mito doesn't know how to act after all. She's a girl disguised as a guy who's going out with a girl. Maina apologizes for her invitation and asks if she has any romantic interest in anyone, which makes Mito even more nervous about the situation. Meanwhile, Ren and Ruka watch the two of them stroll, and Ren thinks the vampire set it up, but he explains that he only asked Mito to get a girlfriend, and even though he didn't want to, admits that she fits with Meina. Then Mito saves the girl from being hit by a car, leaving Ruka jealous. So he decides to go home, and Ren observes that his face looks like that of someone with a broken heart. The vampire says he's mistaken because Mito is a man and they're just friends, but his words fail to convince even himself. Meanwhile, Meina starts to open up to Mito, and she thinks the girl is about to confess her feelings. However, contrary to what everyone was thinking, Meina reveals that she's been in love with Ruka for some time. Meina was surprised by this, and Meina explains that she found out they share a room, and being friends, she imagines she should know if the guy has a girlfriend. Meina feels sad to remember that she's nothing more than a simple friend to Ruka, and even though she feels a pain in her chest, she says that as far as she knows, he doesn't have a girlfriend. Meina is relieved and says she doesn't think she has any chance with Ruka, but if she decides to confess, she wants to ensure she won't cause any trouble for him. Meina notices that Meina is a good girl and says that as Ruka's friend, she wants him to be happy, and Meina is happy to receive her support. Afterwards, the two bid farewell, and Mito starts feeling bad again about being nothing more than food and a friend to Ruka when Ren appears. She tries to smile at him, but he notices tears falling from her face and gets worried. Then Mito leans on him for comfort when suddenly Ren starts feeling pain in his chest and asks her to step away. Ren's teeth sharpen and his eyes change color. Mito becomes concerned about him and ends up getting closer, which makes the guy sense her sweet scent and lose control. As Ren approaches her neck, she pushes him away and realizes something was wrong. However, he knocks her down to the ground, forcing intimacy between them, and sinks his teeth into her neck, causing Mito to complain of pain. As a result, Ren regains control and is shocked to have attacked his friend because of his father's blood, who is a vampire. He apologizes to Mito and leaves. Then the girl continues on her way alone while remembering when Ren warned her that Ruka is a vampire and the strength he had, which was enough to break through a wall. She also remembers again when the guy attacked her and wonders if that means he's a vampire. Meanwhile, Ren gets angry because he promised to protect Mito, and instead, he attacked her, making him like the other vampires, but then he quickly denies comparing himself to them. When the girl arrives at the dorm, she is still thinking about what happened with Ren, and as she opens the door to the room, she comes across Ruka playing a girl's anon game he likes. The vampire was so focused on achieving his special move in the video game that he doesn't even notice her approaching. After winning the game and celebrating victory, he finally notices Mito's presence and asks how her meeting with the girl went, thinking she had stayed out late with Meina. He even goes as far as to ask if there was any kissing during the outing, and Mito gets irritated hearing Ruka talk about the atmosphere that passed between them, as he didn't even consider the idea that the girl is actually in love with him. Because of this, Mito says that the guy wouldn't notice if someone fell in love with him because he doesn't understand how a girl feels. However, she ends up mentioning how Ruka always hugs her and bites her as if he were about to kiss her, without realizing that she changed the subject, which was about Meina's crush on him. The vampire then teases Mito, asking if she isn't talking about a girl's feelings, but rather her own feelings for him. She tries to get away, but Ruka lays her on the couch and gets even closer, asking if that makes her heart beat fast. As they were very close to each other, the vampire hears Mito's heartbeat and asks if he's the cause of it, even though they're both men. Then the girl pushes him away, denying having any feelings for Ruka, and runs out of the room. Mito walks through the hallway of the male dormitory, where Juri and Takara were talking. They both see her running and are puzzled about what happened. The girl runs until she reaches a window, where she sees her reflection and admits to herself that her heart is beating fast, making her wonder if she's really in love with Ruka, which would be a problem since for him, she's a man. After a while, Ruka realizes that he teased Mito more than he should have, wanting to know what she really feels for him. The vampire notices that his own heart has been beating fast since they got close, which had been quite some time, and wonders where Mito is since she hadn't returned to the dormitory yet. The girl was walking down the street and overhears a conversation between two girls talking about one of them confessing to a guy. This makes her wonder if she should tell the truth to Ruka. However, Mito thinks that the vampire might be hurt to find out that she lied to him all that time, which makes her completely lose the courage to take the risk of telling him the truth. As she was distracted, she ends up bumping into a guy who seems to have a violent demeanor. His friend starts to pick a fight with Mito, but the guy she bumped into notices that Mito looks a lot like a girl. So the two start mocking her cute and fragile appearance, while Mito can't react because she feels that as a woman she can't defend herself against them. Suddenly, Ren appears and pushes the guys away, who recognize the delinquent and flee in fear, not wanting to mess with someone like him. Mito thanks her friend for the help, and Ren says she shouldn't be alone in a place like that and asks the girl to return to the dormitory. Mito agrees, but remembering what happened between her and Ruka, she's afraid to go back to the room and for the vampire to notice her girlish face, which is quite unreasonable fear, considering that the guy has already seen her in a dress and didn't suspect anything. But Mito was afraid that Ruka will find out the truth and explains to Ren that she doesn't want to go back to his room that night. Meanwhile, the vampire searches for her all over the city and Komori observes his master's concern for Mito, even though she's not his destined partner. Ruka says it's okay to worry about a friend's safety, but as he remembers what happened between them before she fled, he stops trying to deny his feelings and simply continues his search for her. Sometime later, Ren takes Mito to the door of the male dormitory, and the girl says again that she doesn't want to go back there. Still, Ren carries her and easily jumps, enough to leap over the wall of the place, which makes her sure he's not human. Then Ren says that although he doesn't know what happened between Mito and Ruka, she can spend the night in his room. So the two go there, and the girl notices that his room is kinda empty. Later, Ren explains that he will sleep outside somewhere so that she can spend the night in his bed. The girl says she can't just take his room and asks Ren to stay, but he remembers that the last time they got too close, he attacked her. Mito takes the opportunity to ask if Ren is really a vampire, and he explains that he's actually a creature caught in between because his mother is human while his father is a vampire, which makes him a combination of both. He tells how he was always too strong for a human since he was a child, which made everyone around him find him weird and sinister. And when he tried to get closer to the vampires, they rejected him too. In other words, he didn't belong to either world. Ren explains that his mother was his only ally, but she ended up following his father and becoming a vampire, leaving him alone in the world. Mito says he's like her. She recounts that she barely remembers her parents and went through the hands of several relatives until she ended up where she is. She also thinks that even though she's there, she doesn't feel useful to Ruka, although she doesn't mention this to Ren. However, even without saying anything, Ren realizes that Mito deep down still feels like she doesn't belong anywhere and considers comforting her. But he ends up backing off before doing so and tells them both to keep a certain distance because being a half-vampire, he can't know when he'll lose control again. So Ren starts to leave the room, but Mito suggests that he sleeps on the floor while she sleeps in the bed because that way they'll keep a safe distance from each other. Then the girl remembers that she didn't bring pajamas and asks Ren to turn around so she can wear some of his clothes, which are quite loose on her. After they both lie down to sleep, Mito asks if Ren was trying to protect her to prevent her from turning into a vampire like her mother. The guy doesn't say anything, but Mito continues, saying that he's always around when she's in trouble, and for that reason, no matter what creature he is, they will always remain friends. Then Mito wonders what Ruka might be doing. The vampire returns to the dormitory after searching for her throughout the city, where he meets Komori, who reminds him of his promise not to fall in love with anyone other than his destined partner. Ruka gets tired of the butler, constantly reminding him of the promise because even though he knows he shouldn't, he can't help but worry about Mito. Back in Ren's room, the girl sleeps soundly, and the guy gets up to observe her closely. He almost kisses her, unable to resist what he feels, even though he still thinks she's a boy. In other words, even after seeing her in the hot springs without a wig, the guy still hasn't realized that Mito is a girl, managing to be even denser than Ruka. However, before they can kiss, the girl says the vampire's name in her sleep and apologizes to him in her dreams while crying, which reminds Ren of when she said that they are alike because there's no one in the world who needs them. So Ren wipes away Mito's tears and tells her not to worry because he's by her side, and they end up falling asleep embraced in bed. The next day, Ruka, who was already desperate with Mito's disappearance, starts knocking on doors early in the morning, looking for the girl throughout the dormitory. He wakes everyone up and no one understands what's going on. Then Juri and Takara ask the reason for the commotion, and the vampire explains that Mito ran away the night before and hasn't returned yet, but he knew she wasn't anywhere in the city, and since she has nowhere else to go, the girl could only be somewhere in the dormitory. After knocking on all the rooms, only Ren's room remains, but Juri says there's no reason for Mito to be in the room of a delinquent like him. Even so, Ruka starts knocking on the door insistently, waking the girl up. She's surprised to see that she was sleeping with Ren, who wakes up shortly after her. Since no one opened the door, Ruka decides to force it open, and upon breaking in, he finds Mito, who is clearly sleeping with Ren. Everyone is confused about what she was doing in that room, and the vampire goes furious at Ren, asking what he was doing with his Mito. The guy questions since when she's his property, and before the two could fight even more, Mito explains that she asked to sleep in that room. Then Ren tells Ruka that if the girl is so important to him, he should learn to hold onto her better. Ruka is surprised to learn that Mito chose to sleep in that room instead of being with him and irritated with the whole situation. He tells the girl that if she prefers Ren, she can be his roommate from now on. After a while, the vampire walks down the street wondering if he was too harsh with Mito, although he thinks that, anyway, she was wrong to stay in Ren's room while he was worried and looking for her everywhere. Then, Ruka looks to the side and sees a women's clothing store, reminding him of when he saw Mito wearing a dress, making him want to taste her blood. After Ruka got mad at Mito, the girl felt really down. To cheer her up, Takara says he only got mad because he was worried about her. But since Mito remained feeling down, Juri suggests the three of them spend the day together, skipping classes and work. Stoki and Takara take the girl to the beach. To keep her secret, she wears a swimsuit during the outing, while Juri sticks to regular clothes to avoid getting sunburned. The three enjoy the beach day together, and Mito catches the attention of girls wherever they go, despite having a clearly feminine beauty. Until Juri and Takara come up with the idea of renting a float. Then Juri and Mito get on the float in the sea, guided by Takara, who pushes them. They take photos together to capture the outing, and Mito is impressed by the cold seawater, comparing it to the river, probably because it's her first time at the beach. She enjoys the sea and thanks Juri for suggesting the outing. He says it was nothing, as he also wanted a beach day. Suddenly, the two notice that Takara stopped pushing the float, realizing he was completely distracted by some bikini-clad girls. He abandons his friends on the float to go after the girls, and Mito notices that this made Juri sad, so she asks her friend if he likes Takara. Realizing that Mito has already figured it out, Juri admits to having feelings for the guy, but says he'll probably never be reciprocated, as Takara likes girls. Then Mito asks if that isn't painful, and Juri responds with a smile that, although it sometimes hurts, he can't stop liking him. At that moment, Takara returns, grumbling about getting rejected by the girls because they already had boyfriends, and hands a cherry blossom shell to Juri, making the boy happy. He explains that he found the shell while playing volleyball with the girls and picked it up, knowing his friend likes that kind of thing. Juri thanks him for the gift, and Mito watches him, finding him cute and very strong for enduring with a smile the fact that his love will never be returned. Seeing the two together, she decides to go home to apologize to Ruka so they can make amends. Juri and Takara approve the idea and decide to go to work, even though it's late and they've missed their shift. Meanwhile, at the cafe, Ruka thinks about how to apologize to Mito and decides to make a dessert for her as a way of apologizing, knowing she loves to eat and it would make her happy. After a while, Komori appears to inform that Mito and the others didn't show up for work, so the substitute employees will take over for the day. As he approaches, the butler notices the vampire assembling a plate, and Ruka explains that he's making a dessert for Mito to make her happy. Komori realizes that explains the vampire's interest in the new hobby, as he had never shown interest in cooking before when one of the employees shows up to inform that a customer asked to see Ruka. So he goes to her, who introduces herself as Meina. This makes Ruka remember the girl who went out with Mito a few days ago. He asks how he could help her. Shortly after, Mito and her friends arrive at the cafe and apologize for being late. The girl immediately starts looking for Ruka, but as she can't find him anywhere, she goes to Komori to ask where the vampire is. The butler asks if something happened, and Mito explains that she needs to see Ruka to apologize to him. Komori then observes that she cares a lot for her master, enough not to change her feelings, even if it becomes painful. Mito doesn't understand what the butler means until he shows her that Ruka was outside with Meina. The girl was gathering courage to confess, but as they had been silent for a while, Ruka remembers he has to get back to work. Realizing her time is running out, Meina gathers courage and asks if he likes someone. Ruka immediately remembers Mito and wonders why he thought of his friend at that moment. The girl continues, saying that if he doesn't like anyone, they could date, while Mito watches them together, worried about losing her vampire. Ruka is confused by the sudden proposal after all. Until then, he thought Meina liked Mito. Suddenly, the vampire feels weak and the girl gets worried. Komori, who was watching them from afar, realizes Ruka is anemic from not feeding for a long time. Mito is worried about him and quickly tries to go to the vampire, but the butler stops her, saying she shouldn't interfere because beside him is the highest quality food possible, the sweet blood of a woman. Mito is sad, but admits Komori is right. Then the butler goes to Meina and asks her to take Ruka to his room in the dormitory, making up the excuse that the cafe is too busy for him to take the guy there. So Meina starts taking Ruka to the dormitory, while Komori reflects that due to his master's hunger, he should be able to drink a woman's blood despite the resistance he has with them. After that, Mito is devastated. She imagines the two together in Ruka's room and thinks that now that he has Meina, he will only feed on the girl and won't meet her anymore. Suddenly, Mito hears a commotion from the customers and upon going out to see what's happening, encounters Ren dressed in his work uniform. She's puzzled by what the guy was doing there, and Ren explains that Komori forced him to work because of the confusion he had with him and Ruka, which made Mito late for work. The girl apologizes to Ren for causing trouble for him and decides to take on the task that was assigned to him. However, in her haste to take on the tasks, Mito almost trips carrying one of the orders. Fortunately, the vampire catches her, preventing a disaster, and notices her teary face. This reminds Mito that even though her body is here, her heart is where Ruka is with Meina, even knowing that he no longer needs her now that he has a sweeter new source of nourishment. Ren notices Mito's sadness and offers her to stay in his room as long as she wants, as she might not have a place to return to, and he can provide that place. Before Mito could respond, she hears Juri calling her and goes to him, where her friend shows her a sweet treat that was in the fridge with an apology for her. The boy explains that he asked the other employees and found out that Ruka made the treat, indicating that he also wanted to make amends as much as Mito. So the girl starts crying for thinking that the vampire no longer needs her, even though he had prepared that treat precisely because he cares about her. Seeing how Mito wants to make amends with Ruka quickly, Juri tells her to leave the cafe with them and go settle things with the guy. So Mito runs off the treat in hand, passing by Ren, who is left puzzled. She stops running and apologizes to him, declining the invitation to stay in his room as she already has a place she wants to return to. Meanwhile, in Ruka's room, the vampire, somewhat unconscious due to anemia, smells the sweet scent of strawberries nearby, instantly awakening his appetite. He approaches Meina, which leaves her a little frightened and confused, but upon seeing that it was a girl, he becomes frustrated. However, Ruka realizes that his body is practically moving on its own because his vampire instincts are craving the sweet blood of a woman. He thinks that by the scent, the girl must have grown up being loved by everyone around her, and he realizes that this is precisely the opposite of the life Mito had. The comparison reminds Ruka that he has to meet with Mito. So the vampire resists his instincts and tells Meina that they cannot date because he likes someone else, and although he doesn't know if he is or isn't reciprocated or if that person still needs him, it doesn't matter because it's someone very important whom he can't stop thinking about. Just then, Mito enters the room all happy carrying the treat, but she is taken aback upon seeing the vampire next to Meina, thinking she interrupted their moment. Nevertheless, Mito proceeds with what she came to do. She apologizes to Meina because she also wants to be by Ruka's side, and that's the only place she belongs, so she cannot support the girl's feelings as she did last time. Meina understands what's going on and says she's realized that she's not capable of making Ruka happy, and for that reason, it's her turn to support Mito. Then the girl leaves the room to leave the two alone, and Mito asks to return to staying in the room with Ruka. Obviously, the vampire agrees since he desired the same thing. And as they make amends, Ruka asks her to come closer because he was nearly starving. The girl then approaches and the two hug while she bursts into tears, feeling like she's finally returned home. Meanwhile, outside, Meina cries for having her heart broken. And in an attempt to cheer her up, Juri and Takara offer her some cake to eat. Then Meina cries even more and asks the two to bring an extra-large dessert, surprising them with the size of the girl's appetite. Back in Ruka's room, the vampire feeds while Mito feels her heart flutter, unable to help but feel happy because of the moment. Suddenly, the two hear her stomach growl loudly, making the girl die of embarrassment. Ruka notices that only he was eating and picks one of the strawberries from the treat he prepared and puts it in her mouth. Mito eats the fruit but lets some juice drip from her mouth, and the vampire sucks the juice, leaving her paralyzed by their proximity. Next, Ruka says he made that treat especially for Mito and offers his apology, holding it by her mouth, getting even closer to kissing her. The vampire says he felt incredibly lonely without her around, and Mito observes that she really can't deny that she likes him. So Ruka asks if there's something she would like him to do, and the girl thinks that what she wants the most is for the vampire to see her as a woman and to reciprocate her feelings. But as Mito can't muster the courage to tell the truth or to confess, she suggests they go out together, just the two of them. Ruka agrees to the idea but then feels embarrassed about going out with a boy and mentally refuses to acknowledge that it could be a date, which doesn't make sense since seconds ago he was fine with the two of them almost kissing. During the night in Ren's room, the vampire misses Mito. He remembers her saying that they'll be friends forever regardless of what creature he is, and he thinks that what he really wants is her, even though he still doesn't know that Mito isn't a boy. The next day, Mito asks Ruka to go with her to a fireworks festival happening that day, and the vampire, after confirming it would just be the two of them, understands it's indeed a date. He agrees to go but mentions he has some things to take care of first, so they could meet up at the event. Then Mito, who hardly had any masculine clothing, goes to Juri to borrow some clothes to wear for the date. Juri is thrilled about the friend's date, while Takara is left clueless about what's going on. Since it's a fireworks festival, the boy looks for a yukata for Mito to wear. Finding men's clothing dull and not cute enough for the occasion, he lends her a female outfit. Mito hesitates to accept, given everyone thinks she's a man. However, Juri, noticing Mito's reluctance, explains that it will be dark at the event, which persuades her to accept the outfit. So the boy gets Mito ready for the date and then pushes her out of his room, causing her to bump into Ren, who was passing through the dormitory corridor. He's confused to see Mito wearing a female outfit, and she explains that Juri borrowed the yukata from his sister for her to watch the fireworks and asks if it suits her. He starts to explain that's not what he meant when suddenly he smells several vampires nearby. Concerned about what's happening, he asks Mito where Ruka is, and she explains that the vampire said he had some things to do before the festival, so they agreed to meet there. To ensure Mito's safety, he decides to go with her and wait only until Ruka arrives. In Ruka's room, 5 vampires explain they came to warn him that everyone is worried because the founder is upset that Ruka isn't searching for his destined partner. One of the vampires recalls that the destined one has an incomparable taste of blood, but Ruka insists he already has food, and that's enough for him. Then the vampire asks if he's talking about Yamamoto Mito. Ruka turns pale, seeing that the vampires are already aware of Mito's existence, and the small group asks if it's true he's obsessed with the disgusting blood of a man. The same vampire suggests they devour the man who is hindering Ruka from fulfilling his role as their future leader. Immediately, Ruka demonstrates the power he inherited from the founder to prevent them from hurting Mito, but the vampires outnumber him and manage to knock him down. The group orders Ruka to stay quiet while they deal with his meal, but he gets up with his red eyes shining and declares that no one will lay a finger on Mito. Meanwhile, at the fireworks festival, the girl gets excited about the many food stalls, and Ren finds her hunger strange. So Mito buys 2 snacks that don't match each other while Ren only grabs one. However, Mito can't resist and takes a bite of his snack to taste it, leaving the guy embarrassed. After a while, Mito finally satisfies her hunger when she overhears a little child telling their mom they want to put a Love Magi doll they bought at the festival on their shelf. From that anime Ruka is obsessed with, making her think if he were there, he would surely want to buy it. Then the fireworks begin and Mito gets absorbed in their beauty when Ren takes the opportunity to say he likes her. She doesn't hear him due to the fireworks noise and asks him to speak louder. Ren considers letting it go, but then gathers courage to confess again. However, before finishing his sentence, he sees Ruka arriving injured in the midst of the crowd. Mito also sees the vampire and rushes to him, worried about what happened to him to be all bruised up. Ruka simply says he went a bit overboard. Later, the girl looks back to see Ren, but he's already gone as he had warned he would only stay until the vampire arrived. He runs away while reflecting on a feeling even he wasn't aware of coming out of his mouth. At the same time Ren thinks about his feelings for Mito, Ruka apologizes to her for being late for their date. However, the girl is only concerned about tending to his wounds, and in her desperation, she accidentally bites the inside of her mouth. So Ruka picks Mito up so she won't fall again, catching the festival goers' attention, who see them as a couple. The girl feels embarrassed and asks the vampire to put her down because she doesn't want people to see them like that. Because of this, Ruka takes Mito to a slightly more secluded place and explains that since everyone is distracted by the fireworks, no one will notice them there. The girl then sees a bridge nearby and remembers that's where she fell and was saved by the vampire, leading her to comment that if Ruka hadn't shown up that day, she would have lost her life and she's glad to have met him. Afterward, Ruka notices Mito scraped her knee when she fell. He uses his vampire powers to heal her and mentions that the powers come in handy once in a while, although most of the time they're just used to steal things from humans. Then Mito decides it's her turn to heal Ruka and starts licking his wounds to make the pain go away. The guy observes that not long ago, Mito was afraid of people seeing them as a couple, but now that no one is looking, she seems not to care anymore. Mito explains that since he has a destined partner, she thought he would be bothered by people seeing them as a couple. Ruka says he doesn't care about any of that and doesn't mind if he has a partner because all he wants is to protect the person in front of him at that moment. And so the vampire kisses Mito as the fireworks continue. After the kiss, the girl wonders if that means Ruka likes her too, when they both realize his injury has disappeared. The girl remembers she had cut her mouth when she fell, so she should still have blood. Then she asks Ruka if it was supposed to be a kiss or if he just wanted the blood from her mouth. The guy, embarrassed for kissing his friend, takes advantage of that excuse and says he really couldn't resist the smell of blood. Mito feels disappointed in Ruka, noticing her expression, asks if she wanted it to be a kiss. The girl doesn't admit her feelings and walks away from the vampire, telling him not to do such things because it would push women away. However, even though she's disappointed, she continues to be happy about what happened. At the same time, Ruka thinks he wouldn't do that with any girl and admits to himself that he wanted to kiss Mito, regardless of whether she's a man or a woman. After the encounter, the two return to the dormitory, where Mito finds the room all messy. She starts to tidy up, but when her hand accidentally brushes against the vampires, she blushes and makes up an excuse that she's going to get a vacuum cleaner. Next, Ruka finds Komori at his window in bat form carrying a rat, which was the animal form of the vampire who threatened Mito's safety. The butler explains that while he was away, a group of vampires visited them and drained their powers so much that they got stuck in their animal forms and can't return to their vampire forms. Ruka asks if it wasn't Komori who was leading the group. The butler transforms into his human form and denies being involved with that, but says it's clear that the citizens are concerned about the next leader's capability, and for that reason, he's summoning Ruka to a meeting, which he must attend immediately to find a clue to who his destined partner is. Ruka refuses to leave the dormitory and says he doesn't need any partner. So Komori uses his power to show that he's not in a position to refuse the invitation. The butler also says he doesn't care if Ruka has affection for Mito, as long as he doesn't forget that as the future leader of the vampires, his main role is to lead them. Then, after Ruka and Mito clean the room together, the girl falls asleep while the vampire thinks about the two paths he has to choose from: to stay with the most important person to him at that moment or to find his destined partner to become a leader. The next day, Ruka tells Mito that he and Komori are going back to their hometown for the summer vacation, but promises he'll be back soon. The girl notices he's serious and says she'll be waiting. And so the two leave the dormitory while Mito reflects that even Ruka has a family. To not be alone, she decides to temporarily move into Juri and Takara's room. However, they were also going back to their homes just like everyone else in the dormitory. After her friends also leave, Mito has her meal feeling lonely for being alone in such a large place. A snake watches the girl from afar and she gets startled by the noise of the animal getting closer and closer when suddenly she bumps into Ren. Mito becomes delighted to find out she's not alone, and Ren explains that unlike the others, he doesn't have a home to return to. She celebrates and gets close to him, which makes the guy remember when he confessed his feelings during the festival. Then Mito comments that it's just going to be the two of them in the dormitory for 2 or 3 days. But Ren warns that he doesn't want her in his room or them to get too close, leaving the girl puzzled. Later, Mito decides to take a bath, finally being able to enjoy the enormous public bath of the dormitory. As she prepares to undress, the snake, which is actually one of the vampires who got stuck in their animal form after losing the fight against Ruka, reappears. To return to his human appearance, the vampire needs to ingest a lot of blood and decides to seize the opportunity to destroy the most precious thing to Ruka, Mito. Meanwhile, at the vampire meeting, they question Ruka for leaving the nation to find his destined partner and not even trying to find her besides having fun with a man. Everyone expresses their dissatisfaction and says that if Ruka doesn't become a perfect vampire after inheriting the founder's powers, the nation will be ruined. Back at the dormitory, the snake finally attacks Mito and bites her. The girl is terrified of the animal while the vampire desires more of her blood to return to his old form, realizing that it tastes perfect because, in fact, Mito, despite deceiving Ruka, is a woman. The vampire prepares for another attack, but Ren appears just in time and holds the snake with his hand, shocking it to see that a mere human stopped it. Ren, who apparently can read the enemy's thoughts, explains that he's actually a half-vampire, half-human who hates his kind more than anything in the world. Then the guy makes the snake lose even more of its powers until it becomes completely harmless like a worm. After that, Ren goes to Mito, worried about the possibility of the snake's bite being venomous. He asks where the snake bit her, and the girl explains it was on her chest. Ren says he can suck the venom out if he licks the spot and starts trying to remove the bandage from Mito's body. He tries to stop him, but being weak, he can't. Then the bandage comes off and Ren finally realizes that Mito is actually a woman because only a blind person wouldn't notice that in that situation. Ren is still in shock with his discovery while Mito worries about what will happen now that her secret has been revealed. So she tries to get up but feels the effects of the snake venom. Despite the situation, Ren decides to act quickly and grabs a towel to cover as much of the girl's body as possible so that he can suck the venom out of her body as respectfully as possible. Afterwards, he apologizes for doing it, even though he knew it was necessary. Then Mito faints and her wig comes off, fully revealing her womanly appearance. Meanwhile, Ruka continues to hear the dissatisfaction of the vampires about him until he gets tired of all the questioning and tells a group of hooded vampires to talk face to face. An old lady then approaches and warns that as soon as Ruka returned home, the stars spoke to her, and now that he's there, she will show his destined partner through her crystal ball. The vampire doesn't take that story very seriously until his partner appears in the crystal ball, leaving the guy completely mesmerized by the red-haired girl in the image. However, he then remembers Mito and shows resistance to accepting his fate, saying that it's just fortune teller nonsense. The lady doesn't like his comment and says she has never been wrong at prediction. Then Komori, who knew very well the reason for Ruka's resistance in accepting his partner, approaches him and asks if he was expecting to see someone else in the crystal ball. The vampire tries to deny it, but Komori insists that he discard the feelings he has for the other person because compared to destiny, love is nothing. As soon as he meets his destined partner, he will see how impossible it is to live without her. At that moment, the crystal ball starts to glow and the lady warns that the vision is not over yet. She examines the ball and discovers that on that same night, the destined partner will appear by the water's edge and she and Ruka will have a fateful encounter. The guy reflects on what he has just discovered while one of the hooded vampires acts in a mysterious way with that information. Back to Mito, the girl dreams that she is in a completely dark place when she is attacked by the snake. After being bitten, she reveals her womanly appearance and Ruka appears afterwards, disappointed with the discovery. He says that the two of them can't be together now that he knows the truth and leaves to meet his destined partner. Mito starts crying when she wakes up and realizes she was just dreaming. Ren was at the edge of the bed and the girl feels embarrassed to realize she was without her disguise. She apologizes to the guy for lying all that time, but asks him not to tell their secret to anyone because if Ruka finds out she is a woman, she won't be able to stay in the male dormitory. Mito gets desperate just thinking about the idea of the vampire knowing the truth, but Ren reassures her and promises not to tell anyone. Then he asks if she has recovered from the snake venom. As the girl agrees, Ren says that in exchange for her silence, she will have to go out with him. And so the two take a walk together and Mito is relieved to realize that Ren's request was simply to leave the dormitory, because she was afraid it meant a date. Then Mito asks where they are going. The guy takes the girl to a women's clothing store and says he will buy anything she wants from the place, because although he doesn't understand many things about women, he knows they like beautiful things and deduces that something like that would cheer her up. Some girls in the store overhear the conversation and comment on how kind Mito's boyfriend is, which makes the guy prefer to wait for her outside the store. Then the saleswoman appears and offers a set of clothes to Mito. While waiting, Ren remembers the moment he discovered that Mito is actually a woman and realizes how blind he was not to have noticed the truth before. After all, the two even took a shower together. Shortly after, Mito appears wearing the saleswoman's recommendation and Ren is enchanted by the girl. Seeing how feminine she is, the guy asks why Mito keeps dressing like a boy and this ends up making him remember the fireworks day where he confessed to her. At that moment, several boys passing by notice Mito, and some think about going up to her to start a conversation, but seeing Ren's stern face, they get scared and decide to leave. Then Mito explains that having a pretty face isn't necessarily a good thing because even her relatives didn't like her and her appearance makes her a target for weird guys often, which is why she got tired of her face and started pretending to be a boy. When Mito finishes explaining, Ren hugs her and tells the girl not to let other people's opinions make her hate herself, and from now on, if a stranger comes after her, he will protect her. Suddenly, a guy appears and greets Ren, and Mito recognizes that he is one of the students from the male dormitory. Meanwhile, Ruka, who is already back in town, remembers Mito and wonders what will happen to her when he meets his destined partner. Back to Mito, the girl is afraid the dormitory student will recognize her, while he asks Ren to introduce his girlfriend. Then the guy whispers in Mito's ear to go back to the dormitory, while he distracts his friend. The girl immediately runs away and on the way reflects that Ren has just discovered her secret and she's already causing problems for him. After a while running, Mito stops in front of a fountain to rest for a bit and looks at her reflection in the water, wondering what Ruka would think if he saw her like that. By coincidence or fate, at that exact moment, the vampire appears. The girl gets startled and ends up dropping her bag on the ground. Ruka goes to help, and as he approaches, he feels something different and remembers the prophecy that on that night he would meet his predestined partner, who would appear by the water's edge just as it had just happened. Then Ruka remembers when Komori said that as soon as he met his predestined partner, he would see how impossible it is to live without her. The two stare at each other for a while until the vampire realizes he was making the girl nervous and apologizes for staring at her. This makes Mito realize that Ruka didn't recognize her, and they finish picking up the things that have fallen from her bag. After picking everything up from the ground, Ruka, who apparently lacks any vampire instinct to not recognize the person who literally lives with him, asks to talk to Mito for a bit. The girl is surprised by the invitation but ends up accepting. And so the two have juiced together, with her fearing Ruka would recognize her. After some time of silence, the vampire apologizes for not knowing what to talk about with the girl and explains that he just watches anime all the time. Mito, who already knew this side of him, says they can talk about anime. But before they can start a conversation, they hear some people in the place talking about some dolphins that were in the fountain through map projection, and they also stop to watch the attraction. Then Mito observes that at that moment she is by Ruka's side as a girl, as she always wished, which makes her extremely happy. Nearby, Ren walks towards the dormitory when he sees Mito with Ruka and is puzzled since she had said she didn't want the vampire to find out her secret, but seemed very happy by his side. Mito and Ruka get closer to the fountain to see the dolphins, and the guy takes the opportunity to say that as strange as it may seem, he feels like it's not the first time they're meeting and asks to see the girl again. Mito doesn't know what to say because although she wants to meet the vampire again as a woman, it's very risky. So to change the subject, she asks him to buy an ice cream cone and she gets super excited about the gift. After finishing eating, Mito thanks him and Ruka approaches to clean her face that had gotten dirty with ice cream. However, this leaves both of them hypnotized by each other, and the vampire starts to act on instinct and gets closer to her neck, craving her blood. Suddenly, the clock at the location starts to chime, indicating the time, which snaps Ruka out of his trance. He apologizes to Mito for approaching her like that, and she says it's time to go home and starts to leave. Then the vampire grabs her hand and asks the girl to at least tell him her name. Mito becomes sad and says she believes they won't meet again, and after saying goodbye, she runs away. Ruka stands still for a moment, just reflecting on almost having bitten her, which means he desired the blood of a woman. Next, Komori appears, commenting that the vampire finally met his predestined partner, and asks what he will do now, as he was simply letting the girl go at that moment. So Ruka hurries to catch up with Mito, while Komori thinks that the guy's destiny has always been by his side, and yet he still can't see the obvious. Mito continues running away, while also being happy that Ruka finally saw her as a woman, although she knows it couldn't happen again while she continues her disguise as a boy. Suddenly, Mito hears the vampire's voice calling for her. Realizing she was being followed, the girl doesn't know what to do when Ren quickly pulls her into a dark alley, causing Ruka to pass them by. Then Ren kisses the girl and says it doesn't matter if she's a man or a woman because he wants to protect her as his boyfriend. Far away, the mysterious vampire who was at Ruka's clan meeting drinks wine while reflecting on how good it has been to observe the recent chaos in the world of vampires. He comments to himself that it seems his clan has a chance because the special ability that only vampires possess has been rejected until now. Upon turning 17, this ability is awakened and reaches its maximum power, and as soon as Ren, his son, drinks the blood of Ruka's predestined partner and proclaims his desire, he will get what he wants. Later, when Ruka arrives at the male dormitory, he still couldn't get the girl he met out of his mind, and upon entering his room he finds Mito, who was already disguised as a boy. She asks how his trip to his hometown was, and the vampire starts to recount what had happened that day, but before revealing the news, Ruka changes his mind and just says it was late and they should go to sleep. So already lying down, Mito finds it strange that she feels sad. After all, she was lucky the vampire didn't discover her secret. The girl looks at Ruka sleeping and joins him in his bed. Shortly after, the guy hugs Mito and says aloud that he wants to see her again, which makes the girl deduce that he's dreaming about her female version, which leaves her both happy and sad at the same time. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to hit 90,000 subscribers. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you in the next one.